This is a photograph I took the night before I was going to attempt to do the first swim across the North Pole. I will never ever forget that feeling inside my stomach, realizing that the next day I was going to be diving into that icy ocean. We're finally at the North Pole. This is months and months and months of dreaming to get here, years of training and planning and preparation, and in a couple of hours time I'm going to get in here and do my swim. It's all a little bit frightening and emotional. I walked up to the edge of the sea ice, I said a short prayer, and then I just dived straight into the Arctic Ocean.
You did it, Lewis! You did it! You did it, man!
I choose my teams based on a number of different criteria which I'm looking for. The first thing I'm looking for is I'm looking for men and women who could honestly put up their hand and say, Lewis, I'm one of the best in the world at what I do. I need the best of absolutely everything because there's just no margin for error. You make a small mistake and one of you or a number of you are going to lose your lives. The second thing which I'm looking for, though, is I'm looking for the complete opposite of that. I hope that nobody in our team would ever have put up their hand and said, you know, I'm actually one of the best in the world at what I do. And that is because they're very, very humble. And when you get somebody who's very confident on the one hand and very humble on the other hand, where those two meet, you get a special person. And it's a rare mixture, getting humility and confidence perfectly together. The reason why humility is so important is because the circumstances often change. They change so quickly. I need to pull the team around me. We need to argue out a new position. Then we need to take it very, very quickly. Arrogant people, they know everything. I heard about what was happening in the Himalayas. So I decided I'm going to climb all the way up onto Mount Everest, onto the highest mountain on this earth, and try and do a symbolic swim across a lake which has just been formed because the Khumbu Glacier is melting away. I prepared myself the way I have prepared myself for 20 years of swimming. You see that I don't sort of put my foot in the water and say, am I going to go for a swim today? I get a little bit aggressive, focused aggression. I dived in and I started swimming crawl as quickly as I could. In less than 30 seconds, I could barely breathe. I'm gasping for air. We're at 5.5 kilometers above sea level. The oxygen is so thin you can barely breathe. After 30 seconds, I'm gasping for air. I accidentally swallow some water. I cough it up. I think to myself, just don't stop, Lewis, don't stop. And then I just had no strength inside my body at all. And it all happened very, very quickly. I literally sank to the bottom of this lake. Luckily, the lake was very, very shallow, just a little bit higher than I was. I pushed myself up. I took a couple of deep breaths, and then I said, don't stop, Lewis, don't stop. I put my head down, and then I start swimming crawl. 7 strokes later, and it was all over. The leader of the expedition, a British Army general, 69 years old, comes running into the water. He pulls me out. He said, Lewis, if you want to have another go at this swim, I suggest you take a radical tactical shift. I look at him and I say, a radical tactical what? He said, a radical tactical shift. He said, why are you trying to swim so quickly? And I just held up my hands. I said, because I couldn't feel my hands for 4 months. I'm trying to swim as quickly as possible to keep myself, warm. He looked at me and he said, Lewis, this water is warm. It's 2 degrees centigrade. There's a bit of, slack in the system. He says to me, what I suggest you do is that instead of swimming as quickly as possible, you actually swim as slowly as possible. He said, instead of swimming crawl, I recommend you start swimming breaststroke. You're then going to be able to breathe more often. But he said the most important thing is that instead of swimming with all this aggression, you start swimming with a little bit of humility. And then he points up to Mount Everest. He said to me, you cannot bully this mountain. What radical tactical shift do you need to take? I learned a lot of lessons there on Mount Everest, but the 2 main lessons which I learned were the following. First, just because something has worked in the past And for me, it had worked for over 20 years. Just because something has worked in the past doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work in the future. And the second lesson I learned was, you can change your stroke, or you can change your speed. But for real and effective change to take place, you actually have to completely change your mindset.